Hi, everybody, and welcome to our online sex ed event. This event that we're doing today from the staff of the Center for Connection and Desire is to celebrate Happy Adult Sex Education Month, Happy Pride Month, and also we're having this event to really commemorate our launch of our online sex ed series on YouTube. So I'm so excited to be here today. And what we're going to do today is you're going to learn a little bit more about some of our staff. And we're also going to answer some common sex ed questions we were able to elicit from our posts to our communities. So I'm really excited about that. So my name is Catherine Dukes. I am the practice owner of the Center for Connection and Desire and Bedroom Brainiacs. And I am also a sex therapist, a relationship therapist, and a sex educator. And I'm going to toss it over to Julie to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Julie. I am a therapist with the Center for Connection and Desire. I'm a sex therapist, a relationship therapist, a sex educator, a dungeon master of the Dungeons and Dragons persuasion, as well as a queer individual who really values, well-informed sex education.
Perfect. And I loved your extra identities. And I also kind of like jumped too quickly. I didn't say that I'm, queer and bisexual. And my somewhat limited time, I'm also a musician. So those are parts of my identities as well. Okay, Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate. I am a sexuality educator and trainer, and I'm also an instructional designer. I've been doing sex ed kind of in some form or another since high school. And I'm really excited to be here today and to launch our adult sex ed content.
Thank you both. And I'm so excited to work with both of you. One of the first questions that I want to do, because I'll be moderating this event, is I want to ask each of you about your passions about being a sex educator. And so I think that what we do is so wonderfully unique and it can be so incredibly fun and rewarding. But oftentimes people, who aren't sex educators, like, how did you ever get into that? Or why do you do that? And so I'm wondering if you could each answer the question, and I can start with you, Kate, this time. Why did you choose to focus on sex ed as part of your career? And what are is a topic or topics you're passionate about teaching?
Yeah, good question. I was drawn to sex ed because it's one of those topics that, it's kind of the elephant in the room, but like of our entire life. Like sexuality just informs so much of our life in terms of like our physical relationships, our emotional relationships, but it's one of those things that we just don't talk about. So I think I was drawn to that because I was like, oh, this sort of thing that permeates every aspect of our life, but no one ever really talks about. And I found that I was comfortable talking about it. So I was like, maybe I can kind of be the conduit to educate people on this thing that is such a part of our life. And like kind of in line with what I'm passionate about, I'm really passionate about demystifying things because I think, sometimes the mystery, it's what makes something sexy, but mystery also makes things kind of like unapproachable, or it kind of makes it seem like you're not allowed to learn about it or you're not allowed to talk about it. So I like being the person who can like demystify things and break them down into really like bite-sized pieces of information and to just give people that knowledge and the skills to really just understand how sexuality operates in their life and how they can have a really positive, fun experience with their own sexuality.
Awesome. And what do you love teaching? Like which topic or topics do you think is the most fun for you to teach?
I really love anything that kind of gets into like sociology. So like talking about gender and talking about how where we get messages about sexuality, where we get messages about right and wrong, kind of like breaking down everything in our head and like asking like, where do these things come from? Where do these ideas come from? And helping people see that it is kind of like something that is socially constructed. And I think that helps people to understand where those messages come from and then also some like rewrite those messages for themselves.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that. All right, Julie, same thing. What led you to focus on sex ed as part of your career? And also, what are you passionate about teaching? What do you have the most fun teaching?
Sure. Well, I think there are a couple big major players in wanting to do sex ed. Like, one was being uninformed myself, right? Like, I grew up in a kind of backwoodsy area that didn't have quality sex ed for school. And another big player was like, I have ADHD, and my ADHD has sort of two main components. One is a difficulty with authority. If I don't understand why something is a rule, I just don't want to do it. And then two, hyperfocus. So the combination of like, oh, people say we shouldn't talk about this thing, made it intensely interesting, which then drove me to just be like, well, then I'm going to learn all about it and read all about it and talk all about it and challenge these authorities that say we're not supposed to talk about it. And here I am now doing it for funds. It is very fun. And that combination of things, both like being able to provide people with information that they just don't know, that they don't know it, being curious when it's fun. That's kind of my big thing, is like, I just want it to be fun, because it is fun. And that's such a foundational piece of what sexuality can be, because it's who we are at our core. So my favorite things to teach are definitely anything pleasure focused. And then also I really like having opportunities to kind of, piggybacking off of what Kate was saying, is just kind of going like, hey, people tell you stories about what sex is supposed to be, and you might be different and your sex might be different, and that could be super cool and fun for you. So let's embrace it.
I love that. For me, I've wanted to be a sex educator since I found out that was actually a thing when I was like 19 or 20. And my long story short is I was raised with a mom who was an immigrant from Europe. So my mom kind of came over here when she was 17 from France. And as I grew up, like my mother raised us with like the correct names of body parts. And she didn't have like much shame when she was talking about body parts and, sex and reproduction and things like that. And I thought she was so weird because she was like comfortable with it. And I was being taught by my culture and my community that you're not supposed to be comfortable with it. You're not supposed to talk about it. You're supposed to feel a lot of shame about it. And so it wasn't until I got to college that I was like, oh, wait a second. Wait a second. This is a cultural difference. Like, we actually don't have to, like, talk about this in whispers and hushes, and also I was experiencing, like most people, like the impact of all of that, like shame and hush hush and don't be open and don't talk about it. And there was just a series of experiences where I just kept challenging some of those party lines and being like, that doesn't sound right, that doesn't sound right, that doesn't sound right. Learning that growing up in high school as a cisgender girl, I could be either a prude or a slut. I'm like, wait, that doesn't sound right. There's something wrong with this logic. And so me choosing to look at that and challenge that eventually got me pretty quickly in my early 20s to become a really passionate sex educator. And all I wanted to do then with my whole career was do sex education. I do love it so much. The things that I have the most fun talking about or teaching is sexual development through the lifespan. And I also really love teaching about how to answer sex questions. And I teach it as often as possible. We just came out with a Bedroom Brainiacs video on YouTube. I did a really short one on how to answer sex questions. And then also just I love teaching adults about how to get comfortable and talk about sex. So those are my passions. All right. So we're going to move into, in the last like 10 or 15 minutes of our event, we're going to move into answering some questions that we were able to elicit. And so we'll bounce around and we will all contribute to different parts of these questions. Okay. So Kate and Julie, are you ready for some questions?
Sounds great.
Okay. All right. So the first question we have is, how can couples talk about or deal with sexual desire differences? And so, Julie, if you wouldn't mind starting to talk through that first, and I'm happy to add stuff.
Sure. I think one of the things that we miss when this question comes up is defining desire. I think there's such a piece of people coming to one another and just kind of saying, you never want to, or I always want to, or I never want to. and nobody really talks about what wanting to is for them. And so I think foundationally, like that very kind of first step is beginning to talk about what desire is to each person individually, and like building from there and seeing like what is it you're noticing of in regards to desire, and then finding, because that a lot of times what you find out is the imbalance that you think is so intensely different is actually maybe only somewhat different, and that becomes a much more comfortable conversation to navigate, when you're sort of going, oh, we aren't on different planets, we're just maybe in different rooms.
I love that. And so not just like how do you experience desire or what does it mean to you, but then I want to build on those great concepts. You know, some of the conversations that I have with my individuals or couples or more is around like, what do you desire? Like, you know, what makes, and I forget if it's Esther Perel or someone else, like what makes sex worth having? Like what is it about a positive sexual experience that is desirable? And then, you know, in navigating desire differences with couples, something that I also look at with individuals and couples is like, well, like, yeah, so, you know, so what would be ideal? Like, how often might you have sex? But also, like, what are the breaks that are coming on that make sex not desirable? Two main killers of desire are um, feeling like it's obligatory sex, and the other one is like negative anticipation. So if you're approaching sex, but your brakes are coming on, like, I'm worried about disappointing my partner, I'm worried about my body not responding, I'm worried about, like, what if it doesn't go well? All of those things really kill desire. And so oftentimes I'll have individuals or couples come in because they feel like they're low desire or their desire differences, which is also really very valid. But when we take apart the kinds of sex that is pleasurable to them and the kind of sex that they are having, switching some of that and the communication about how you get there is makes all the difference in approaching sex that is has positive anticipation and has pleasure and has less goal focus, less obligation. And so all of those things can be such a rich, fertile ground for moving through that very common issue. Awesome. Okay. You guys ready for the next question? Okay. I love this question. This is a sex across the lifespan question. How do I learn about my own pleasure? So Kate, would you take the lead on this one?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a great question. As Kat said, something that people of all ages wonder about. I think one of the easiest ways to approach this question of learning about your own pleasure is to take the sex out of it. So you can think about pleasure even without thinking about the world of sexuality. You can just think about kind of like, as you move through the world, what are the kind of experiences that you enjoy? You know, like what kind of fabrics do you like wearing? Do you like being warm? Do you like being cold? Do you like the feel of being in the shower? Do you like the feel of being bundled up in blankets? What kind of smells do you like? What kind of sounds do you like? And I think when you kind of just start to pay attention to the way that you kind of like move through the world and experience the world and what you really enjoy, I think that's a great way to start thinking about your own pleasure and what you enjoy and what makes you feel relaxed and comfortable. And then you can bring that into your sexual relationships. You can, you know, if you want to explore touching your body, touching your partner's body, you know, you can just kind of pay attention to what you enjoy, pay attention to what you like. And then if you have a partner that you feel comfortable, you know, exploring those things with, you can do that. You can explore with a partner, you can explore on your own, with toys, without toys. But I think you just kind of have to start paying attention to what makes me feel really good, whether I'm on my own or with a partner, whether you're in a sexual situation or not. Just start thinking about like what makes you feel good, what makes you feel alive, what makes you feel comfortable and safe. And then I think as you start to pay attention to those things and your mind gets more tapped into that, it'll feel more comfortable to explore pleasure in terms of like sex in your own body.
Awesome. Julie, would you mind adding to that?
Sure. So I think that foundation that Kate is talking about of like getting relaxed and comfortable is so essential. And then adding curiosity to that is such a key component. Oftentimes we've talked a little bit about the idea of like, we all get these stories about sex, and we get this story that like sex is supposed to have this start and stop. And it's like, you turn it on and you're having pleasure, and then you orgasm, and then that's when you're done. And this idea that like, you could just be curious and see what something feels like. And if it feels okay, then you've learned that. And that is a enjoyable experience in learning this thing about yourself. And if you try something and it feels really great, then now you know, like, maybe I want to do that more, and I want to add this other thing, and coming at it from a place just of frankly curiosity, with that foundation of like, I am relaxed and I feel comfortable with myself in this moment, or with myself and my partner or partners in this moment, leaves that opportunity to really get to learn, rather than have it feel like this is a puzzle I have to solve.
Right, because there's that pressure again, right? Like that thought, that pressure. There's what you're both making me think of. There's actually a little bit, I've never written this down, but there's a little bit of a homework assignment that I often give to sex therapy clients. And I call it like the beer flight homework. And so, like, when you go out to a restaurant, you order a beer flight. It's not because you're like, oh, I'm going to go have my favorite beer and I'm going to drink my favorite beer. It's like, I'd like to try and like be mindful. To your point, Kate, I'd like to be mindful around like, what are the sensations or the tastes or whatever. Like, I'm trying this beer, and to your point, Julie, it's kind of like, being open and curious to the experience. I don't usually like raspberries, but maybe this raspberry beer I might like. So what I have my clients do, like, let's say they're working on their kissing is unsatisfactory. I'm like, let's take kissing out of your sexual events. And at a time that works for both of you, I want you to sit on the couch, watch a few YouTube videos, have a kiss, talk about how you liked it, try a different kiss or a deeper kiss, talk about what you liked or what you would change, and actually have a beer flight in kissing. So we can take the kissing practice and exploration out of the pressure of, we're having a sexual event where we should have desire and we should have arousal, and there should be hardness or wetness or whatever, and everyone should have orgasms. And of course there should be penetration, right? And so we take it out of all of that and we do the beer flight homework. Not to reinforce alcohol use, but it's just a metaphor. All right. Awesome job, both of you. Thank you so much.
It could be an ice cream flight, or I don't know. People do flights of everything these days.
Oh, that's a good point. It could be a pancake flight. It could be whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. All right, so let's do two more, and then we'll close our video today. Okay, so this was also a great question that came up. How do I talk to potential partners, a potential partner or partners, about my relationship preferences, like toward ethical non-monogamy? So Julie, you were the lead trainer on our workshop in January on Love Remix, Navigating Ethical Non-Monogamy Relationships. Would you take that first turn at this question?
Sure, absolutely. So, we're sort of building on a concept here from question to question of like safety and feeling relaxed and feeling comfortable. And so there's this starting point with any conversation, but especially a conversation like this, where you want to feel safe and you want to feel secure. And so knowing what you need yourself to feel safe and secure, if this is your identity, if this is your preference, doing some of that internal work to feel confident and comfortable in owning that piece of yourself when you bring it to your partner. And then from there, there's no perfect time to have a conversation, but there are bad times. So when we think about, this is a conversation that may take some time, and that both people will want to process and have opportunities to push pause if it feels scary or uncomfortable. So, creating a space where you have room to do those things. And then from there, being able to communicate what matters to you about being non-monogamous, why polyamory or open relationships or ethical non-monogamy of any kind feels important to you. And just being honest and sharing that, and knowing your own boundaries around what you're comfortable receiving in response. If somebody comes back in response to that in a way that feels unsafe or belittling or judgmental or condemning, then recognizing that and setting the boundaries you need to set to continue to protect your identity and yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And also having that conversation where you feel like open and curious and connected, right? And if one of you gets flooded or activated in some way, you can pause that conversation and come back again so that you're being able to, like, in a way that feels safe and open, discuss that, because that can get very complicated, right? A lot of strong feelings can come up when you're navigating some new relationship structures. What do you think?
Well, certainly it is a story that many people hear very loudly, that we are supposed to be monogamous and that sexual fidelity is the most valuable asset of a relationship. And so for many people, hearing that that is maybe not something that someone they are interested in desires feels very ungrounding, can feel very unmooring. And so part of what I think is really important about having any real conversation about relationship dynamics is keeping oneself grounded and recognizing what you have responsibility for as a communicator and what you have control over as a communicator. So that sense of, I am responsible for me and my emotions and my identity and my feelings, and contributing to the clarity of the conversation. I am not solely responsible for the clarity of the conversation. The listener also has a responsibility. And recognizing that those things are really true. And while this can be a scary conversation, it can also be one that is valuable and important and affirming. And it is essential to recognize that piece of oneself and, making sure you feel seen.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we've got time for one more question, and I want to bounce it to Kate first. So Kate, do you want to, we have a bunch of questions we're not going to get to. Do you want to answer a question about consent or about sex toys?
Let's go with consent, because I've been kind of thinking that one over.
Oh, okay, great. All right. So this question is consent. Like, so negotiating consent, maybe in short-term or long-term relationships, how to do it, but also like how to do sexy consent. Like, how do we incorporate that in the sexiness of an event?
Yeah, consent is such an interesting topic. I feel like in the sex ed world in the past 10, 15 years, it's been one of those topics that everyone's talking about. And I think consent, it's one of those things that when we talk about consent in relationships, sometimes there's this idea that it has to be really formal and official, that you have to like wear a blazer and have documents and paperwork. And it, like, if that's what you're thinking of when you think of consent, then yeah, I can see how people would maybe not find that sexy or exciting.
Like legal consent, like signing legal consent.
Yeah. But I think if you just think about consent as part of the intimacy process and part of the process of, showing someone affection, I think it can be really fun and sexy. If you say, if you're with someone and you maybe combine it with a compliment, like, you look so great tonight, I can't stop thinking about kissing you. How would you feel about that? Or would you enjoy that? So that's an easy way to like incorporate consent into just like a nice compliment to someone. Or, how would you feel about moving into the bedroom? Like, it doesn't have to be this huge formal awkward thing. You can just kind of incorporate it into your natural communication. And I think it's going back to like, the messages we have in our head. I think you kind of have to, there's a moment of just like being brave and finding the courage to just start that conversation. Because the first couple of times you do, practice that, like, is it okay if I do this? Would you be interested in this? It will feel a little bit awkward, but then the more you do it, the more it'll feel like natural and fun and sexy. And then if you combine the consent conversation with conversations around pleasure, that's when it can feel like exciting and sexy. So I think it's less about like stopping and having a formal moment of, do I have your consent? And more about just like weaving it into your conversations and your pleasure and your intimacy together. And then that makes it feel so much more natural.
I love that. And there's so many gems there about like the in the moment consent too. And I love how you talked about weaving it into other conversations. Consent, we can take a great nod from the kink community, and whose values include explicit communication, explicit consent, mutual pleasure. And consent can also be beautifully incorporated ahead of time. Like, what are your limits and boundaries? Like, what are your wants and hopes? What are your favorite things? Like, what do you hope? Like, it can go into like flirting in the way of like, what would you like to do tonight? Right? Like, how would you like to feel tonight when we're together? Would you be interested? Things like that. And then consent can also, you can have a retrospective consent afterwards. If we're going to talk about like, what worked and what didn't work, for my clients, I suggest that conversation maybe happen on the couch with clothes on, but if you want to talk about what really worked, like what were your favorite parts of like what just happened? And then if you want to talk about what worked and didn't work about consent, maybe later on the living room couch or the kitchen with clothes on, you're like, hey, I wish you had sort of checked in a little bit more about this. Or like, oh, after I touched you, I thought maybe I should have checked in more about that. What was that like for you? Okay. I want to thank both of you for spending this time today to create our video honoring Adult Sex Ed Month and Pride Month, and also this video really being created to kind of mark the occasion of launching our online sex ed series on Bedroom Brainiacs on YouTube. I'm super excited about that. What I would like to, anybody who's watching this video, I encourage you to follow us on Facebook at Center for Connection and Desire, and also find us on YouTube. It's like youtube.com/Bedroom Brainiacs. So please subscribe and like us and participate and learn more about us, because we're so excited to be here to offer our sexuality and relationship expertise, not only locally to our Delaware community, but online for all. So thank you so much for joining us.